Good morning, hockey YouTubers. It's your buddy Choppadong. I am coming at you with an NHL version of DFS Diary this morning. We're going to try and make this really, really quick and blow through the NHL slate as fast as we can. It's a four-game slate, very, very cut and dry, in my opinion. We got a few teams to focus on, a few players to focus on, and then we can wind it up and turn you loose from there. Welcome in. If this is your first time joining us, I am Choppadong. I am the content editor for DFSArmy.com. It's a one-stop shop for everything daily fantasy sports, MMA, PGA, NHL, whatever. We've got all of the sports covered. We're always coming out with new content. We're always honestly, you see our Army hats always on top of the leaderboards dominating. We coach people into becoming better players. So if you're looking for something like that, we'd love to have you. Kick on down into the comments section, click the link, dfsarmy.com, and use coupon code CHOP to save 20% off when you decide to join and take us on. Let's jump in. Let's talk a little bit of NHL. As always, you can follow me out on Twitter at Choppadong. It's where a lot of my videos are going to appear, as well as here in YouTube. So thank you guys for the likes and the subscribes and all that good stuff. We're going to roll out, talk a little bit about the key games today when it comes to the NHL. Nashville is in a decent spot, to be honest with you. They're not implied to score a ton of points. But Colorado's also in a good spot. And the way you can tell is a lot of times by using shot on goal and goal scoring type of numbers. And this is just one of the better games that this small four-game slate has to offer. Why? Because a lot of others are worse by default. St. Louis isn't scoring a lot of goals right now, and they are not giving up a lot of goals this last month right now. These are season-long rankings, and to be honest with you, St. Louis is under 2 goals against per game in the last month, so they've kind of tightened the ship up a little bit. I don't see LA posing much of a threat when it comes to tonight. I'm not saying St. Louis is going to win, but I would also expect this game to maybe play towards the under. I'd be very, very light on my exposure here unless I could find a large field GPP to get into, in which case maybe you can justify going out of the box a little bit. But on those smaller, if you watch the NBA video from earlier today, if you play the smaller slates, the smaller tournaments, the things that don't really have a ton of reward to the risk, you don't need to take big risk to win those things. And a lot of times the people that do take those big risks in the long run don't get rewarded enough to continue taking those big risks. They may get lucky, they may win one and think that they made the right play, but ultimately they didn't, because the payoff isn't there. Kind of like in poker, chasing a flush draw. If you we have $100 pot, yes, I can win $100 pot. But if you bet $100 and I have to call $100 to win what amounts to $200, then I'm only getting 2-to-1 odds when I need 5-to-1 in some cases on my money to actually pay off the investment. And this is very, very similar when you're talking about large field and small field GPPs. And a lot of these people are sort of chasing these big GPPs like they would chase bad odds flush draws in poker, and they don't realize it, but they're just never going to get back the amount of money that they're spending in order to to pay off the risk. So before babbling on too much about that concept, hopefully that made a little bit of sense to you. That's where I would consider this game today. I would anticipate it playing towards the under. There are a couple of players in the games that I might like, but generally speaking, that game should not be great for fantasy goodness if we played this slate, say, over and over 100 times. Minnesota is also not a great spot to be sticking your money. Vegas, however, is. They've got pretty darn solid goals for here lately, and they are one of the top teams on the slate. So San Jose, Nashville, Vegas, and Colorado is where I would focus my money, but I would also focus it. There's San Jose down here. You can see they're scoring well. They're giving up some goals in return, which puts Florida in a pretty good spot if they're scoring, and they're giving up their own goals. So this is your shootout game, your hammer game, the 6.5 on the over-under, probably where I would spend most of my time looking for players to participate. If I wasn't going to game stack it, I may try to take one or two players from these teams and then fill in the rest with the rest of the slate tonight. When it comes to goalies, it's a little bit hard to say because your big favorite tonight is Fleury out there in Vegas, but he's also very, very expensive at like $9,300 on Fanduel. I really, really like the idea of Jake Allen. And the guy who's been standing on his head a little bit recently, his odds are in his favor on the road. LA doesn't pose a serious threat. Jake Allen is much better on the road than he is at home. His road splits are very, very solid. So I would anticipate a solid performance out of him with a low risk of getting just the doors blown off of St. Louis tonight, being that they've also played very, very good defense in front of their goalie the past month or so. I'm not saying it's a cash type situation where it's maybe the safest play on the board, but I'm going to say it's a sneaky low risk type of play, to be honest with you. And I'm very, very comfortable running it in just about any format of hockey that I'm playing tonight, especially on a smaller slate with limited options. When I don't want to pay all the way up for a Marc-Andre Fleury, I can pay down to 7,300-ish for Jake Allen, and I'm fine with that. And if it burns me, it burns me. But more times than not, given the information we have presented to us, LA is not going to demolish St. Louis. If anything, it's a 3-2 type of game. If St. Louis allows some shots on goal, which LA is not known for really pumping the shots on goal, but if St. Louis allows shots on goal, then you've got yourself a little bit of a floor with Jake Allen, and he's projected to be, I think, 23 points or so in the highest value on the slate. So it won't surprise me if he turns out a little bit chalky tonight. Diving into the actual players themselves and kind of the core that we're looking for, let's go ahead and let's start at center. One of the things that I like to do is I take this page, I scroll over to the last 5 games, and this is if you're in a real super hurry, and you sort this Fanduel or DraftKings average, whichever site you play on, and you sort it by descending order. You bring all of the hottest guys up to the top. You can compare with their other 10-game average, this blue number over here. You can also watch for this shots on goal and blocked shots floor, which is something that I very, very much look at as a tiebreaker. I want the hot guys, but if it's a low shot, shot on goal type floor, then there's a lot of production involved in there. And when there's a lot of production involved in that type of a high average and low shots, it's fluky. It's hard to predict goals and assists. It's easier to predict shots on goal. If I see a ton of shots on goal along with the high production and the high, FanDuel or DraftKings scoring, then I can safely assume that's going to continue for a while, being that the volume of shots is just so high that a few of them are going in. He's also playing very, very well. He's getting results for the amount of volume, but at least if something goes wrong and we don't get the production tonight, we can fall back on what should be a higher shot on goal or block shot type of floor, which should at least give us some points and might not wreck our night, as long as somebody else picks up the slack somewhere else in our lineup. Looking at some of these guys, let's start with the centers. Shouldn't be too difficult to get a quick handle on who we're looking at tonight. Once this sorts out for us, the first thing that I'm going to notice, since I've sorted already by the last 5 games and the average points per game, is what salaries are out of whack. Because theoretically, if everything was perfect, we'd sort by the highest points in the last 5 games, and as we go down the list, the salaries would get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But when they get jumbled up because pricing can't keep up with production, you find your hotter players up there. Your Carl Soderberg is the second highest last 5-game average point producer on FanDuel, yet he's I think the 14th highest salary at the center spot. That's ridiculous. That's tremendous value in there. And in terms of daily fantasy sports, we look for value plays. We want to know at each position where the key value is so that we can slot that in as we need to save some salary. This would be one place I would definitely start. I would maybe, if I was going to run a McKinnon and an O'Reilly or something like that, I would probably be considering that more of a GPP only build, because it makes sense to run Soderberg out there right now at 5,000, 5,400 over on DraftKings. 24 shot on block floor, shot on goal and block shot floor, and 18.9 point FanDuel average over his last 5 games. It's huge. And again, he's the second highest producing center right now on the slate, and he's the 14th highest salary. So there's inherent value in there, and that's something you should definitely be keying on. Vincent Trocheck came way up from the $3,000 back on Friday or Saturday. Just the stupid salary that was. It looks like FanDuel finally caught on to that one as they moved on. Ryan O'Reilly always produces. If St. Louis is producing, Ryan O'Reilly is typically involved. So that's a very, very good sign. He's expensive, and I don't like his price, but he's somebody I would consider if I was going to play a St. Louis type of player. Nathan McKinnon, always a cash safe type play on any slate, but if we quickly pan over here again, I can show you where it can be a little bit iffy. When he's a 21.6 average over only 5 games, and he's a 27 point per game player over the last 10, or 7.2 to 5.7 if you're a DraftKings guy, you're looking at a guy who is not living up to what he was 5-10 games ago. And the problem with that is he's priced according to what he's been doing over the last 10 games. So if he's priced at a 27 point per game type player and he's only producing you 21, he's overpriced. McKinnon can flip the switch and, drop the hat trick or a couple of assists, Sidney Crosby style or Connor McDavid style. He's one of those types of players. So you have to take this a little bit tongue in cheek. But if you want to look at the slate as is on paper tonight, this is one area where you would definitely look at the guy and say, this might be a good opportunity to get away from him, where on a 4-game slate, the rest of the world is going to be stacking McKinnon and Landeskog and Rantanen. That's just what they typically are going to do, especially without the big brand names like, Boston and Washington and Pittsburgh and some of these other guys out there on the slate. They're going to really hone in on it, and this may be a good opportunity to fade Nathan McKinnon. Now, looking at some of the other centers on the slate, you can find some value, but this is typically a relatively shallow spot. These are the guys that we could be looking towards, but generally none of them are producing, balls on fire or anything, so you're kind of gambling when you're taking any of those guys. I would say your big two value centers are Soderberg and Trocheck right now. And I'm looking, okay, so maybe Jeff Carter over on DraftKings, maybe Nick Bonino. That's a good name actually on Fanduel as well. So you might throw him into the mix. But those are your value guys, and then you're going to end up paying up in some of the other spots. If I wanted to kick down onto the wings, start looking at them, bear with me while this catches up. There we go. Now it's going to take a couple of seconds. It's still sorted by those last 5 games, FanDuel average. DraftKings very, very similar to FanDuel in the scoring as far. It's just a different, 20 points versus 7 points or whatever. And Landeskog jumps right to the top of the list. There's where I'd get my Colorado exposure. Okay, and you'll see on defense where you may or may not be looking at Tyson Barrie as well. But Landeskog and Rantanen is going to always be on this list, but he's a little bit higher priced. And right now, when you look at the cost comparison between them, they're the same price. So I'd better be seeing similar production. But I scroll over here, I've got 35 shots on goal as my floor, which I pointed out to you before is a very, very important number, and 25 points per game of production. That's telling me Landeskog's ball's on fire. Now, Rantanen's got 23 points, so it's about similar. But look at the shot on goal. This is where I was telling you that the floor isn't there for Rantanen right now. He's getting some results, probably through some assists. He's not probably shooting a lot and scoring a lot of goals per se, although he does have 4 even strength goals in the last 5 games. So what the hell do I know? But only 4 in his last 10 games. It's very, very interesting. He's very, very steady, though. 23 points here, 23 points here, versus Landeskog's 24 versus his 25. The DM. Very, very. I was enamored by the high shot and block goal. So if you wanted to fade McKinnon and his points and run Skog and Rantanen out there, you probably are doing an okay thing. I was going to think that Rantanen was a little bit overpriced, but being he's the same and they're only a point or two different, kind of take one, take the other, whatever you want to do there. But this is where you're going to want to get most of your Colorado exposure. One or both of these guys. The others would be a little bit more GPP play because, as I showed you, McKinnon's a little bit overpriced. It's hard to avoid Evander Kane right now also, to be honest with you, even though he's a little bit under his 10-game average. He's pretty ridiculous in how steady he has been. And I look at some of these other guys are interesting, but Marchessault has a 26 goal, shot on goal type floor, and Max Pacioretty has a 23 out of Vetrano. Vetrano's cheap. There's your value play. 28 out of Zach Parise. These are some of the things that I would be looking at when I'm trying to tie break between some of these scores, and I'm naturally going to miss a few of these as I go tonight. But as I scroll back over here to the left and start looking for salaries out of place, I'm going to land pretty quickly on some of these guys right in here with Vetrano, Brandon Puri, LeBlanc. LeBlanc is interesting because he's got a very, very low shot floor, which means he produced, which means he probably had a decent game in there somewhere. I would exercise a little bit of caution there. I may use him if I absolutely needed to punt somebody and was reaching for a hotter player, because there's no other real $3,000 players in here until you get all the way down here to a Matt Calvert or a Timo Meyer's even expensive at $5,300. So you really don't have a lot of deep value choice at the wing. So you'd be looking more for defense or maybe that center spot in a Trocheck or even a Bonino, something like that, if you were going to counteract it that way. Looking through some of these, though, they're all mixed in pretty good. And so you're really just looking for Looking for production to break those ties. I mean, Vetrano and Piri are probably your value plays at the position. Piri much more so on Fanduel than DraftKings, but on DraftKings, Vetrano's the same as he is on Fanduel, so that's probably your play there. Florida's in a sneaky GPP spot tonight too. There was somebody I would have my eye on for sure, and up on that top line. I'd be looking at a Barkov or Dadonov type exposure with him as well. Maybe a Keith Yandel as we'll see on defense. Something to get a little bit of exposure to those guys. But that's, again, just roughly how you're going to assess the slate as we go. And we'll really quickly jump into defense and we'll kind of wrap it up. We're not really seeing a ton of stacking options tonight. It looks like you can be pretty balanced in your structure. I wouldn't probably go cash games only tonight. I'd still be playing some GPPs, but it looks like a more balanced lineup might be the way to go tonight. Tyson Barrie and Brent Burns are the top two defensemen on the slate in terms of points per game over their last 5. But if you look at these numbers again, we've got 16 and 15 versus 22 and 29. How off is Burns? Much like Nathan MacKinnon, Burns can break a slate, but Burns is overpriced currently based on the same theory that I told you about Nathan MacKinnon. Tyson Barrie as well. So it looks like really of the big 4, which have been Barrie, MacKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen. Rantanen and Landeskog are the 2 you would focus on. The other 2 might be a little bit of an overpriced fade. You might get a leg up on the field there by doing it. Now, they might backfire on you and just completely score all the points tonight and leave me looking like an idiot. But on paper, I think I've showed you where your bargain, if there's going to be one, is likely to be with Rantanen and Landeskog, especially Landeskog, as hot as he's running. If you're looking for quarterbacks on the power plays, Josie, Muzzin's not a terrible play out in LA, being he's got a 28 shot on goal and blocked shot floor, and he's producing about 14 points per game, a little bit above his last 10 game average, but he's got this high floor, which helps you when you're looking for cheaper plays. Theodore is the same. I'd make sure Colin Miller isn't injured. He looks like he's dropping off the list. Nate Schmidt's another one that has a decent floor for the price. But again, Ekholm and Yandel, look at Yandel's numbers here. 10.9 points over the last 5 or 10 games, 12.3 over the last 5. So he's on the uptick. 23 shots on goal and blocked shots versus 38. So more than half, because 38, 19, and he's at a 23. So he's on the uptick. He's seeing more activity, and with more activity should come more production, being that he's such a role on that top defensive pairing in Florida and in that power play unit. Now, Florida's not a very good team typically, but they have played well recently, and they're in an interesting spot tonight. So this would be one of those plays that I might take a Yandel, and a Trocheck, or a Yandel and a Vetrano or something like that, and that would be where you could get a little bit goofy in your GPPs, where I'm telling you on short slates you don't need to get too terribly goofy with the smaller prize pools and whatever else. That would be one that makes a little bit of logical sense though, and it wouldn't be too off kilter and too crazy. It's not like you're stacking the 4th line, or you're leaving $2,000 on the table, or doing something really, really kind of crazy to make yourself completely unique and then hoping for the best. This one actually has some logic behind it, where you're getting access to Trocheck with the value inherently, and Vetrano is a value play, and Yandel's up and kind of seeing a little bit of a surge here. So if you catch that surge, you've got them stacked right, then you've got yourself some good exposure across that game if Florida happens to shock the world. Because again, I don't see Florida getting a lot of ownership tonight. I think it's going to be focused in Colorado. So those are just a few things and a few thoughts and some ways to go. If I was going to be looking defensively, I would probably stick to the Josies, Muzzins, Yandels types, and I'm telling you that even with the 31 shot on floor or shot on goal and blocked shot floor, the Burns and Barrie type plays are a little bit overpriced. That would be kind of my bold call of the night, is to fade Barrie, fade Burns, fade MacKinnon, and build your lineup elsewhere. Hope those guys don't go off, because they can at any moment, but on paper they're a little bit overpriced right now based on their current production. So that's my little tip to you. You guys want to talk a little bit more hockey, talk a little bit more game theory. Obviously, we are in DFSArmy.com. We're in the coaching channels all the time. And under the NHL tab, you'll see the coaches' notes. The active coaches for the day will produce picks and help you kind of get through on shorter research time if you're a very busy individual working day jobs and whatnot. So utilize us for that. And if you want to utilize us to talk a little bit more and learn the game a little bit more and get a little bit better at the game, you come inside DFSArmy.com, use coupon code CHOP, CHOP, trigger the 20% off discount. Obviously, like and subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, help me out on Twitter with a little bit of a retweet action, and hopefully we enter you guys into February sweeps as well. February, the sweeps contests have been going very, very well. We fell off a little bit at the beginning of this year just because we were a little bit slow, but we're starting to pick that up as we close out January and start heading to February, and we're going to hopefully buy some more subscriptions for people going forward, because that's one of my favorite things to do, is actually give back to a community that has given me an awful lot of knowledge, an awful lot of enjoyment through the years, and I love helping people become better players, and I also love helping people offset the cost of their DFS Army memberships. So really appreciate that. Come on in, give us a click, give us a like and a subscribe, jump on in, talk some hockey with us. We'd love to have you, and I will talk to you guys probably tomorrow. Take care.